Hello, I'm Adrian Finnegan, and this is Counting the Cost on Al Jazeera, your weekly look at the world of business and economics. This week, the race for the Arctic is on, but Russia says it's open to economic cooperation with the West in the region. So will competing nations collaborate, or could geopolitical rivalry get in the way? Europe is importing more gas from Russia. That's despite a push to phase out reliance on Russian energy by 2027. So can the EU wean itself off the supplies? And could the Nord Stream pipelines be reopened? And Donald Trump's tariffs on cars have come into effect. How will the levies affect the auto industry across the world? And will they help to spur manufacturing in the US or hurt consumers and the economy? Arctic ice is melting fast, giving way to new and shorter shipping routes across the top of the world. Now, underneath that ice, there are billions of dollars worth of oil, gas, and critical minerals. The scramble to control the resources has begun. Russia, though, has a significant edge over the West. With its military bases and ports ringing the Arctic Circle, it's in prime position to exploit the region. President Vladimir Putin has recently warned of intensifying geopolitical competition there. This after US President Donald Trump stepped up his threats to annex Greenland, which is located in the Arctic. But Putin says he's ready to cooperate with the West in economic ventures there that will benefit all sides. Sharif reports.
A vast, frozen and remote region now finds itself at the forefront of geopolitics. The Arctic has been long dominated by Russia, with extensive infrastructure in a region that accounts for more than a quarter of its territory. But melting Arctic ice due to climate change is making it more accessible and has set off a race for control of the region and what it contains. Russian President Vladimir Putin is warning of intensifying competition. And despite Western sanctions, he says he's open to partnerships to tap into the resources of the region.
I'm sure that if our foreign partners come to these projects, this will guarantee them investments for the long term and with a good return. And therefore, all these projects cannot be postponed for later. They need to be launched and implemented now as quickly as possible.
The West accuses Russia of militarizing the Arctic, but Moscow accuses NATO countries of increasing their military activity. Sweden and Finland's recent membership of the alliance further tilts the balance against Russia. Putin says Russia will increase the number of its military personnel in the region.
Russia has never threatened anyone in the Arctic. We will not allow infringements of our country's sovereignty. We will reliably protect our national interests.
The focus on the Arctic's strategic, security and economic importance has increased due to US President Donald Trump's repeated threats to annex Greenland. The US sees the territory as crucial for national security and has had a military base there for decades.
We need Greenland for national security and international security, so I think we'll go as far as we have to go. We need Greenland. And the world needs us to have Greenland, including Denmark. Denmark has to have us have Greenland.
Critics say America wants Greenland, a territory of Denmark, only for its rare earth minerals. US Vice President J.D. Vance's trip to the island in March was highly criticized. Denmark says the island is not for sale, but is open to more cooperation with Washington.
We still have the defense agreement from 1951. It offers ample opportunity for the United States to have a much stronger military presence in Greenland. If that is what you wish, then let us discuss it.
The Arctic holds vast untapped natural reserves. It's rich in oceanic resources like oil, gas, fish, and rare earth minerals. Even China, an Arctic outsider by geography, has declared itself a near-Arctic state and is investing billions to extend its influence there. While climate change poses challenges for humanity, it's offering new trade possibilities, and that's raising its stakes. Sharif, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
Well, let's take a closer look at the top of the world. 8 countries are in the Arctic region: Canada, Denmark through its autonomous region Greenland, Finland, Iceland, Norway, Russia, Sweden and the US. The region is warming 4 times faster than the rest of the world, and melting ice is opening up new and shorter transit routes. Russia is already benefiting from the Northern Sea route. It cuts the journey time between Asia and Europe by up to 40% compared to using the Suez Canal. Shrinking Arctic ice also allows access to untapped natural resources in the region, which is thought to hold 13% of the world's undiscovered oil and 30% of untapped natural gas. Nations within the Arctic region are making claims on these reserves, and many others, like China, are investing billions for access to its vast resources. Pavel Devyatkin is a senior associate and leadership group member at the Arctic Institute. He joins us now from Moscow. Good to have you with us, Pavel. Why is the race for Arctic resources heating up right now?
So, since the end of the Cold War, the Arctic has generally been an area of international cooperation, but climate change is increasing the availability of natural resources. There's growing militarization and political differences related to the conflicts in Ukraine and other conflicts. And now Trump's proposal to acquire Greenland are all raising geopolitical tensions in the region and raising serious questions about the future of the order in the region and Arctic security in general.
How challenging is it, though, to get access to the region's resources, to its oil, its gas, its rare earth minerals?
So climate change is increasing the accessibility of the natural resources in the region, but the warming of the region is also creating unfavorable conditions for drilling operations, for pipe laying, for the development of infrastructure. So on one hand, operating costs will effectively be lower and equipment could perform more efficiently under warmer conditions, but also, there are unfavorable conditions. So global warming is leading to increases in precipitation, wind and wave activity, storms and coastal erosion. So there could be negative impacts on infrastructure and machinery and therefore raise operating costs.
Yeah.
So right now, there is still lots of sea ice in the region, and melting permafrost is still yet to be completely developed.
I wanted to ask you whether the costs of extracting the resources that are there would be prohibitively expensive, in which case, why the race?
Yeah, there's not really that much to fight over in the Arctic because all of the resources are clearly delineated through a clear legal framework, especially the law of the sea. So we're seeing how the law of the sea stipulates the rights and obligations of Arctic coastal states, and this affects the exclusive economic zones and the extension of the continental shelves in the region. We're seeing how countries like Russia are submitting scientific data to the United Nations Commission on the Limits of the Continental Shelf. We're also seeing the US unilaterally expand its continental shelf. That was at the end of 2023. So we're seeing a growing interest in the Arctic because of possible US-Russia cooperation and Trump's proposal to acquire Greenland, but actually it's unlikely that there will be a conflict or armed clash for the resources.
What would cooperation in the Arctic between the US and Russia look like, and what would that mean for Europe and for China?
Right now, we're seeing discussions in the areas of energy, natural resources, especially rare earth minerals. We also saw Russian representatives talk about climate change as an area for cooperation. But Europe may be negatively impacted by this because there could be problems for multilateralism. And we could also see China's role in the Arctic diminish. Right now, Russia has increased its cooperation with China since sanctions have prevented many Western companies and institutions from cooperating with Russia in the Arctic. But the US and Russia have a long history of cooperation, so there is now a big question of the future of China's role in the Arctic.
And with the opening up of the northern routes due to there being less sea ice, what does that mean for global trade?
That's right. So maritime transport accounts for about 80% of international trade, and the melting sea ice in the Arctic is increasing the viability of the northern sea route, or the shipping route in the Russian Arctic. This could potentially reduce transit time between Asia and Europe by up to 40%. China has especially expressed interest in what it calls a polar Silk Road. So Russia has been investing very heavily in Arctic infrastructure, developing its ports, building icebreaker vessels, and has sought to improve its navigational systems to improve navigability along the Northern Sea route. The Northern Sea route is also increasing in its viability because of the melting sea ice and its attractiveness after the attacks of the Houthis in the Red Sea and after the 6-day blockage of the Suez Canal in 2021. The Northern Sea route is also attractive for China because it avoids what the so-called Malacca dilemma, where the U.S. Navy controls its the shipping routes in the Malacca Strait. The U.S. Navy does not control the Russian Arctic. But this process is not without its challenges. The diminishing sea ice is not completely diminished yet. So there's still a lack of infrastructure along the Northern Sea route, and the changing meteorological conditions and remoteness remain challenges to operating in this region. So for these reasons, Russia is building its fleet of icebreakers and developing a monitoring system, but the peak of Arctic shipping is still not with us.
Pavel, it's been really good to talk to you on Counting the Cost. Many thanks indeed for being with us.
Thank you.
The EU bought more oil from Russia last year. A recent report by Ember, an energy think tank, says that imports rose by 18%, driven mainly by demand from Italy, the Czech Republic and France. The cost amounted to nearly $24 billion, exceeding European financial aid provided to Ukraine. And that's despite a push by the bloc to phase out its reliance on Russian energy by 2027 to help deprive Moscow of revenue that helps it fund its war in Ukraine. But there are reports of negotiations between the US and Moscow to reopen the Nord Stream gas pipelines with the backing of American investors. That's as part of Donald Trump's broader push to end the conflict. This is what Russia's Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov had to say in an interview with Russian state-controlled Channel 1 TV.
Now, of course, there are disagreements. But is it only in the interests of Russia and the United States to restore normal energy supply to Europe? I'm referring to the Nord Stream pipelines. It would probably be interesting to see if the United States uses the leverage it has on Europe to force it to not refuse Russian gas.
Well, Germany's economy ministry has pushed back against reopening the pipeline, but members of the Conservative Party likely to lead the next German government have raised the possibility of importing Russian gas again. Now, that's causing a political row. In a long LinkedIn post, Christian Democratic Union Parliament member Thomas Barres said, "When peace is restored and the weapons fall silent between Russia and Ukraine, relations will normalize. The embargoes will be lifted sooner or later, and of course, gas can flow again, perhaps this time in a pipeline under US control." Well, Germany imported Russian gas through the Nord Stream pipelines under the Baltic Sea for more than a decade. The two pipelines, with 2 pipes each, run from northwestern Russia to Germany's northeastern coast. Nord Stream 1 was shut down in September 2022, with Russia saying it will only be restarted when sanctions against it are lifted. A few weeks later, 3 of the 4 Nord Stream pipelines were destroyed in an apparent act of sabotage. Nord Stream 2, completed in 2021, has never been put into operation. Gas was also delivered to Europe through the Yamal pipeline that runs across Belarus and Poland, but Russia stopped flows through that in May 2022. And another route is a pair of pipelines running across Ukraine, but Kyiv refused to renew a 5-year transit contract. The only remaining Russian pipeline is Turkstream, which runs from Turkey to Bulgaria, Serbia, and Hungary, but its capacity is limited. Before its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Russia provided 40% of the European Union's gas imports. The EU has since slashed that dependence by around 2/3. Andreas Goltar is a professor at the Willy Brandt School of Public Policy at the University of Erfurt. He joins us now from Berlin. Good to have you with us, Andreas. When it's EU policy to reduce the continent's reliance upon Russian energy, why did European imports of Russian energy increase last year?
I guess the first thing I want to note is that indeed Russian imports or Russian gas imports to Europe are down considerably. I mean, that would be, 45 billion cubic meters last year, down from 150 or more pre-crisis. And that's significant. And so pipeline gas is gone. What has gone up is LNG, liquefied natural gas. And there is essentially three reasons for it. One, it's still legal to import it. It's not sanctioned. And there are still companies having long-term contracts with Russia, and they try and cater those contracts through LNG. Second, there's a bunch of countries in Europe that still very much favor Russian gas. That's Hungary, Czech Republic, others. And finally, once the gas is in the system, once it has regasified and put into European infrastructure, it's hard to trace it. We call this whitewashing, and so it's fairly easy to do it. All of which, in the end, brings LNG into the Russian gas import balance, and by extension, the Europeans are still feeding Russia's war economy.
All right, so it's spring in the Northern Hemisphere, the end of the heating season. It's the time of the year when the clock starts to tick for Europe to refill its storage facilities. What are EU governments going to do, and at what cost?
That's a very good question. I mean, the European Union has set a target of 90% of refill levels by 1st of November each year. Usually, it's the price spread that does the job here. The price spread between winter and summer prices. At the moment, that spread isn't that big, though, and that's a problem because companies have little incentive to refill over summer. In fact, there may be even some sort of a brinkmanship problem here, because companies know that governments in the end might have to step in and buy on spot to refill storage on time, which means they hold back with purchase and may count on governments footing the bill for it. At the very end, if you buy late, if you buy on spot, it's going to be costly for consumers and industry. But we'll know a little bit more over summer once we understand really what the price spread will be and how big the gap is between refill levels and the targets as set by the European Union.
And what do you make of all this talk of bringing Nord Stream back online? Do you see that happening anytime soon, at least before the conflict with Ukraine has ended?
To be perfectly honest, no, not really. I mean, there's some talk around it. American investors want to come in. There's some utterings from some conservative German politicians along those lines. But at the very end, I mean, 3 out of 4 pipelines are destroyed. You would need to bring them back. That's timely. That costs time and money. Certification is an issue, but I think most importantly, it's politically not palatable. On top of all of this, I think, honestly, that the political economy of European gas imports has really changed. I mean, a lot of infrastructure investment has been done in LNG infrastructure, in regas capacities, and all of that would be out of the money should Russian pipeline gas come back.
With high gas prices, Andreas, threatening Europe's industrial competitiveness, can Europe afford not to be using Russian energy? Do you think it's going to actually hit its target by 2027?
That's a good question. I think there's a couple of factors pointing towards that direction. One is that in the end, a lot of investment has gone into decarbonization, fuel switch, electrification, alternative fuels, power-to-X technologies, green hydrogen. Germany alone is going to build a 9,000-kilometer hydrogen backbone grid to replace brown molecules with green molecules. And all of that will put a dent into gas demand more generally, but also demand for Russian gas. On top of it, you have measures by the European Union like CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that is supposed to shield European industry on its path towards decarbonization. And finally, markets will soften, gas markets will soften going forward in the second half of the decade, which means, time is of the essence. The further we get to 2030, the better it looks for German industry. It's just going to be a difficult period of time in between.
Andreas, really good to talk to you. Thanks for being with us today on Counting the Cost.
Thanks for having me.
He wants to persuade consumers to buy American cars and shift manufacturing back to the US. Donald Trump's answer to that, as usual, is tariffs. His decision to impose levies of 25% on imported cars and auto parts has come into effect. Stock markets and the auto industry worldwide are bracing for the long-term impact, but it's American consumers who are expected to bear the brunt. Many economists say the measure could add thousands of dollars to the price of an average US vehicle. Trump has acknowledged that tariffs could cause financial pain for Americans. He has made a striking admission, though. In an interview with NBC, the president said that he couldn't care less about the prospect of higher prices on imported cars. He says that if that happens, people will simply buy American. Goldman Sachs warned that prices could rise by $5,000 to $15,000. Nearly half the vehicles sold in the US are imported, and almost 60% of them are assembled in the nation from imported parts. The top vehicle exporters to the US are Canada, Mexico, Japan, South Korea, and Germany. As you are no doubt aware, Trump has also recently declared a US economic emergency and announced tariffs of at least 10% on all the world's countries, regardless of how much they export to the United States. And we'll discuss the impact of all that on global trade on a future edition of Counting the Cost. David Bailey is a professor of business economics at the Birmingham Business School, whose research focuses on the automotive industry, and he joins us now from Birmingham. Good to have you with us, David. Before I get your thoughts on the automotive industry, I just want to get a sense of what you think of Trump's so-called Liberation Day, with this sweeping across the board tariffs. What's it going to mean for the likes of you and I?
So I think in general, this means a big hit for the automotive industry. Here in the UK, cars are our #1 export to the United States. So this is going to have a huge impact, particularly in the region in which I live. So the car industry is already being squeezed by a downturn in China, slow sales growth in the likes of the United States, and slow uptake of electric vehicles. So a further blow for the industry. I think we'll see a hit to profits of car makers. And in the United States, car costs are likely to go up. Cars may be made in the US, but components will be affected. So that's going to mean higher prices for US consumers. What about jobs?
I read somewhere that even in the UK alone, something like 25,000 jobs could go as a result of this.
Yes, so ultimately this is going to impact on UK exports. The UK does really well in terms of exports of high-end premium cars and luxury cars to the United States. Think of Jaguar Land Rover, Rolls-Royce, Bentley, Aston Martin. So that will have an impact on production here and ultimately on jobs. That 25,000 jobs at risk kind of figure, though, I think is a big understatement. All those researchers have said, OK, let's take exports out. What's the hit to production? Therefore, jobs. It ignores the fact the industry is already operating well below capacity. Plants could be pushed below kind of minimum viability levels. We could see plant closures and a knock-on effect on the supply chain. So the real impacts could be significantly higher for the UK. And remember as well, the UK economy is growing very slowly. The Chancellor has a real problem in terms of her fiscal headroom. That's going to make life even more difficult for her.
And presumably the same impact will be felt in both Germany and across Asia.
Yes, that's right. I think we're going to see a potentially big hit to Germany. Remember as well, the German economy has been pretty stagnant because the motor of its economy, the auto industry, has been struggling so much. So that's a real issue for Germany going forwards. We're also likely to see an impact in Japan, in South Korea, in Canada and in Mexico. Not so much China in terms of auto, because there's already 100% tariffs in the US on Chinese car exports. But for other car exporting nations, this is going to be a severe blow.
Trump says that these measures are going to make sure that the American manufacturing industry comes back to life, if you like. I mean, is that true? Are we going to see more and more cars made in the US, or is it just simply going to hurt US consumers?
I think we'll see a bit of both. I think we will see some producers like BMW, Mercedes, Audi, which is part of Volkswagen, shift some production to the United States. But remember, cars made in the US bring in imported components, and those tariffs apply to components as well. So production costs in the US will go up, cars will become more expensive, consumers will face higher prices, and overall demand will fall. So ultimately, it's going to be the American consumer who will be paying for this. But let's be honest, we're all going to be worse off. Trade is a good thing in the sense that it's good for economic growth. And if we end up in a world of tariffs and countervailing tariffs, there are no winners.
David, it's been great to talk to you. Many thanks indeed for being with us on Counting the Cost.
Thank you.
Global gold prices have rocketed this year as markets react to global uncertainty, fueled largely by US President Donald Trump's trade wars. India is a big market for the precious metal, but the high price has led to a slump in demand. Barbara Angopa reports.
It's wedding season in India, but sales of gold jewellery are down. It comes as domestic prices of the commodity hit a record high in March.
On an average, sales are down by 50%. There's some demand because of the wedding season, but otherwise people are only getting their old gold and getting it repurposed into new designs. Nobody's making any new investments. Gold has touched prices that one never thought of.
The World Gold Council says Indian gold imports touched an 11-month low in February, while its price has hit 13 record highs and crossed the psychological threshold of $3,000 an ounce. Some bullion traders say Indian domestic prices are being influenced by external factors like Russia's war in Ukraine. India is the world's second largest investor in gold after China. And even as prices have broken records, it's still seen as a stable investment during economic uncertainty. US President Donald Trump's sweeping tariffs have rattled markets, and falling share prices have pushed investors into an asset long considered a safe bet.
Buying jewellery is a part of Indian culture, so demand can go down temporarily. It's been considerably down for the past 3 to 4 months, but we are hoping that demand will bounce back once the rate stabilises, once people realise that this is the new normal for price of gold.
Customers like Bhumi can't agree.
Gold prices are increasing every day, but it's still an investment. I personally like to buy gold jewelry, and it's the wedding season right now. Festivals are also coming up, so buying gold jewelry means we can either wear it or just keep it as an investment.
Jewelry makes up about 70% of India's gold demand. Sellers here hope consumers will soon adapt to the new reality. Barbara Angopa, Al Jazeera, for Counting the Cost.
And that's our show for this week. If you'd like to comment on anything that you've seen, I'm at @afinnegan on X. Please remember to use the hashtag AJCTC, or you can drop us a line. CountingTheCost@aljazeera.net is our email address. As always, there's plenty more for you online at aljazeera.com/CTC. That takes you straight to our page, and there you'll find individual reports, links, and entire editions for you to catch up on. But that's it for this edition of Counting the Cost. I'm Adrian Finnegan from the whole team here. Thanks for being with us. The news on Al Jazeera is next.